all 6 aspects of health. So we do episodes on physical, mental, intellectual, social, spiritual, financial health, all to show that our fundamental belief that every person you know knows something you don't. And there is something to absolutely be learned from everybody. So in the spirit of authenticity, the way our show operates is there's no real bias. There's no real persuasion. I don't know any of these guests. Please comment, ask questions. If you need a guest for a podcast, these guys are, going to be excited to be on as well. We've got 4 right here, and we're all available there. So our topic today is intellectual health and listening. So I think this is really going to be an interesting topic and, something that we can definitely all learn from because it's the number one requirement of learning, right? So I want to jump right into it. I want to bring on our first guest, Chad Nedland.
Hey, good morning, Josh. How are you this morning?
Good, Chad. How about you, man?
Good. Excited to be here. Happy to have another day of breath.
Yeah, right. Good deal. Well, so I know you've been on the show before. So our audience has a little recap. Tell us, who are you?
Well, I'm Chad. I'm a husband, I'm a dad, and I'm a lover of life. I love people. I've spent about 30 years now coaching and consulting, helping people to renew their mind. Oftentimes, as we live in the world, we get really wrapped up in what the world thinks we should be, what the world thinks we should be doing, telling us how we should act, but we stop actually looking inside and saying, how is my mind supposed to operate instead of operating based on all of these outside narratives? So I help people renew their mind, get back to the original design of the mind, and help them to create more success in their lives each and every day.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that's really interesting. The design of your mind. So as pertains to our topic today and listening and your intellectual health, what's one tip for our audience that you would give?
Listening for information is great, but oftentimes we don't listen for information. We listen for entertainment. I think one tip that I learned a long time ago is when I started listening to podcasts while I was doing lawn maintenance. And instead of just listening for what they had to say, I started to pay attention to how people said it. And I found that learning to listen more effectively to how people communicate helped me to become a better communicator and therefore be able to actually get more out of life. So listening to understand how to communicate effectively, because people who talk for a living, they're good at communicating. And so learning from that and then implementing that in your own speaking style will really open up doors for you.
Yeah. So how did you learn such a tip, or how did you come across such information?
As I said, I was doing lawn maintenance at the time. I had a lot of time, just me and my phone. And so I would pull up YouTube videos, and I found Les Brown. And Les Brown was fun to listen to, and he was motivating, and he had really good insights. But I found I was always going back to the same 3 or 4 people, and I was like, why do I keep going back to them? They're just saying the same thing. And then I realized that it was the fact that they were engaging me both intellectually and emotionally, which frankly was changing me on a spiritual level as well. I had no idea that switching the way that I listened to him would one day have me sitting on a phone call with Les Brown, helping him get some tips on his business to increase where he was stuck. Like, he was the one that was mentoring me, and he didn't know. Years later, here I am giving advice to the man that got me started. So it was pretty awesome. Why? Because I switched the intent of my listening to understanding instead of just consuming.
That's awesome. First of all, that you've helped Les Brown, and I know he's been an influence to a lot of very successful people, and even myself included. So yeah, that's an awesome tip, I think. And I think you articulated it very well. I want to bring on some of our other guests here and see what they have to say. And we'll bring you back for the round robin at the end here. Thanks so much,
Sounds good.
Chad.
Thank you.
So our next guest is Stacie Shifflett. Stacie, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How about you?
Oh, just out in the world causing trouble.
That's a good way to be.
We'll see how it goes. Yes, ma'am. So, I know you said you hadn't been on the show before. For our audience sake, tell us a little bit about who you are, Stacie.
Sure. I call myself a proficient student of life. I have been referred to as a multi-hyphenate because I have been in so many different industries. And I've worn so many hats, and I feel like I have lived multiple lives within this one life of mine. I am the founder of a company now called Modern Consciousness, and I am a creator of a program that I call Elevate Your Life, in which we very practically chart your unique treasure map to joy. So that's what I do today. I have decades of life experience. I have been, oh my gosh, deeply, deeply immersed in personal development for probably at least a dozen years now, formally. And just a practical girl that helps people elevate their lives.
Nice. So to that end, I mean, we're talking about listening and developing your intellectual health through listening. What's a tip you would give our audience that they can take away from our conversation today and execute on that has helped you?
Absolutely. We are a fountain of information within ourselves. And so often we look externally, right? And we are clearly influenced so much over the years of our lives externally. I like to listen to my little voice, right? I think it's very powerful to raise your awareness and get acquainted and listen to the messages that you are giving yourself, right? If honestly, if I could only offer people one piece of advice on how to really change your life, it would be to pay attention to those emotional triggers, right? Because they're clues. I actually call them waypoints on our treasure map to joy. So we have to take the time to notice our reactions, if you will, and what it's stirring up within us, and then have a dialogue within ourselves to understand why that is triggering to us. And, surprise, surprise, we get to control our reactions, right? Nobody else gets to do that for us. So I think, I really think tapping in to our inner voice is the way to go. It's led me to many successes, oddly enough.
That's an interesting way to think about listening. How did you come about such information or your tip today?
I've naturally sort of learned it. I do have a habit of reinventing myself about every 10 years. I didn't realize that until late in life. But, a great example is I woke up one morning and went, oh my gosh, I need to buy this software company. It was a technology company. I had no money. I had no experience in mergers and acquisitions. And had I listened to what other people were telling me versus my own intuition and my gut feeling, I never would have acquired, without any personal investment, a $50 million technology company that later sold. And, I cashed in my millions, if you will. So I didn't listen to what everybody else was telling me because everybody else was telling me it was impossible. I listened to me. I had a very strong feeling about taking that action. And I tapped into my inner self and my inner wisdom throughout the process. Took 9 months, but made it happen.
Yeah, I've kind of gotten some M&A different stuff myself too. But, one of the things that you said there that really stuck out to me is you're listening to your intuition. Mm-hmm. And so, kind of a follow-up question, how do you know which little voice to listen to? Because, you've got your logic and your mind and your anja, right? And then you've got your instinct and that sacral power too. How do you know which voice to follow?
I think it takes intentional awareness and practice, right? It's a habit just like anything else. So it's not that you don't ever question it, but you develop discernment along the way to sort of know the difference, right? To say, oh, okay, well, that voice, why is that voice in my head telling me this? So let me investigate that. And I find that intuition, when it strikes, is so very powerful. It's such a strong knowing that it is different than some of the other voices in our head that we listen to.
Yeah, even the reason I bring that up is my own personal experiences. I did a lot of things and accomplished a lot of things coming from a very logical place, right? Listening to my mind and sorting things out that way in a card catalog, if you will, kind of manner, right? And I realized somewhere along my journey, with the help of some mentors and coaches, that really my power was in listening to my instincts, right? And I'd made all these accomplishments and done all these things that were really against who I was, not necessarily in a moral or, it wasn't like I was doing bad stuff necessarily that way, but just not in alignment with who I was. And it took me really tuning into my instinct and my gut to say, yes, this is the right way for me, or no, this is not. And so it really made a profound change on my life. So I think it's very neat that hearing from you as well, that tuning into that right voice is super important. So really appreciate your insight, Stacie. I'm curious to see what everybody else has to say too about kind of when we bring back on the round robin. But we'll bring you back here in just a second, and appreciate it a bunch, Stacie. Let's jump into our next guest. Our next guest is Russel Anderson.
Josh, how are you?
Hey, Russell. Good, man. How are you?
Oh, we are just peachy out here. Weather's nice. Had some nasty
peachy
weather the last couple nights. We're okay good now. So yeah, we're good.
Good. Well, Russell, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Gosh, compared to the other guests, I come from a whole different sector. But right now, I am a former communications radio technician. I worked 32 years with the state of Ohio. I retired 10 years ago. I moved out to Iowa. Now I am a creator. I'm an author, and I pretty much work from this chair. So,
man, if you spent that much time in communications, you know a thing or two about listening then, huh?
Well, and I think that's the thing that I'm going to bring that's going to be different, because the communications I'm also an amateur radio operator for about the last 35 years. So a lot of my communications ability comes in communications to communicate via radio, or during an emergency, or during that type of situation. So maybe that brings a different and unique.
Yeah, absolutely. A unique perspective,
I would think.
Well, tell us then, what tip would you give our audience as far as listening and communication then?
The two things that I could say right off the bat is, most times when you engage in a conversation with people, they are not listening to hear what you're saying. They are listening for you to have a pause so they can bring forth their knowledge. So they're not really listening. And a lot of times you find yourself doing that. So listen to hear what people have to say, not just jump in and continue the conversation. And then the second part of that would be in amateur radio circles and in communication circles, like the state of Ohio. Communication, when communicating effectively, repeat back what the person had said. Even if you rephrase it, tell them what you heard. Let them know, I heard you, and this is what you told me. You don't have to go into full depth with it, but repeat back the key point. That's my advice.
Can you think of a specific instance where maybe that was a big advantage to use that tip?
Well, many times in dealing with crisis or emergency situations, you are conveying a message, whether it be we need medication over at this place, and they give the address or they give a telephone number. Just to repeat it back to them, it cuts down that time of possible error. So that would be a time where something like that. Now, in a casual communication, just possibly repeating back what somebody has said to you slightly, just to acknowledge that, yeah, I heard what you said. And then if you want, you can add your insight to that or build upon that insight. That's my tip.
Yeah, man, I think that's a really solid tip. And I definitely think that it's interesting how our guests have had a whole different perspective on something that is most people see as passive, right? Like listening is often thought of as a passive activity, but I can appreciate how you're saying it should be more of an active participation, right? Like it's a two-way street. Listening is not just listening to hear, as you put it. So
yes, not listening for entertainment, listening for information to add upon, not just overshadow.
Yeah. Keep the ball rolling, so to speak.
Sure.
Well, I'm excited to bring all of our guests back on and kind of discuss our tips today, especially with such a varied degree of answers that are all really insightful, I think. So if we can bring Chad and Stacie back in, let's discuss a little bit here. Hey, there everybody is. So yeah, I think you guys all had really insightful tips. Chad, you've sat here and listened to everybody as well. What do you think about Russel's tip in particular? Kind of coming from, I wouldn't say an opposite space as you, but a different perspective for sure. Oh, you're on mute, Chad.
I love communication because it's multifaceted. And what Russell was saying is, oftentimes, even while we're sitting here in the back, we're sitting here listening, going, okay, well, that's an interesting perspective. How do we compare that to what I shared, our perspective, versus just saying, okay, I love that perspective. And what I really love about that is I'm really heavy on trying to understand the other person. Because if understanding the other person is your main goal, listening, then it's easier to respond rather than just talk over. What we have to say is important. What we have to say is valuable for the world. But what other people have to say is equally as important and as valuable to the entire world, not just us. So if we work together, like we are here this morning, where we're actually trying to work together to create something better to release into the world and help the people that are listening, I think that's really where the key stands, is understanding where the other person is coming from, listening to that person. I mean, many of y'all don't know this, but Russell is just an all-around badass good guy. He's got that heart of, let's make sure that the other person is the most important person in the conversation, and how can I elevate that person? And I think the position of servanthood is probably the most powerful position in any conversation.
Stacie, anything to add maybe?
Yeah, I do actually. I took some notes, and I loved, I loved what Russell was saying, and clear communication, and I think it's so important to be sure that you're not only saying what you mean, but conveying what you mean, right? And you have to be very clear, particularly in an emergency situation, to articulate things very carefully. But I think in day-to-day life, we have to be conscientious when we communicate with others, so that our communication is received as they listen. And that includes not only our words, but it's our tone and our gestures and our voice. And I think that is a learned skill. Again, if we raise our awareness around that and pay more attention to that, and we can look for examples in how other people communicate, but it's being conscious and intentional, and really communicating in a way that aligns with the outcome that you desire. So that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, I've personally went on some, pretty deep strides on addressing tone and context for sure. Some of our audience knows this, but I've been involved in the autism community for a long time here in Arkansas. And people with autism tend to miss a lot of those social cues that you're talking about. And so you have to be very literal and very intentional with how you say something, just as much as the tone and the aspects here that you're talking about, mood even to a certain degree, because that person can only receive it as almost as cold hard fact is the way I would put it, right? And that's how they kind of process, rather than have this emotional or even like an analogy type of context to put on things. It just like all that stuff goes way over their head, and they can't grasp it. So speaking to the person you're speaking to with discernment, I think, is very important too, to your point.
Thank you.
And then, kind of just to bounce off of that, Stacie, I thought out of all the answers here, not to downplay anybody else's, but yours was unique and insightful in that listening to yourself is very important. And that internal story that we have, we've talked a lot about it on different shows, and especially in respect to spiritual health, which is our next topic for today. But it's really interesting to me how we can interpret ourself too. Do you have any other kind of insight as far as like listening to that right voice and having that correct discernment?
I think it takes practice, as I said earlier. And I want to mention, Chad, I think it was you said that you did some work with Les Brown, which is really cool. I did a book with him a few years back, Ignite the Hunger with You. He's an awesome man. But, I think it is listening. All right. So I think peace of mind is our greatest asset. I really do. And I think knowledge is the foundation of that. But it's not the acquisition of the knowledge alone. It's actually implementing and starting to embody that knowledge. So we all have our personal worldview, and the best way to do that is to start expanding our knowledge base, if you will, right? I think, Chad, were you the one saying when you were mowing, you were listening to podcasts?
Yeah.
Starting to listen to other leaders who are not just talking at you, but they're actually emulating, you can tell that they embody the characteristics. They're successful with the characteristics that you desire to obtain. And I just think it's really, really important to listen to others and then pay attention to how we're filtering that to ourselves, right? So if we listen to something, for example, and go, oh, I could never do that, that's a limiting belief, which is a way overused term, but it is so true. It limits us. And then so we just would start to question that within ourselves. So we have to listen to the cues that we give ourselves in response to everything that we're absorbing. And we learn over time what to listen to and what to challenge. And I say challenge not with not with guilt or to be rough on ourselves, for lack of a better word. It's really with open curiosity. Oh my gosh, why do I think that? And explore it. And that takes being truthful with ourselves and vulnerable with ourselves at times.
Interesting. Russell, what do you think about kind of that internal story, and especially you're talking about kind of parroting back stuff in a communications way? Do you think that how you're interpreting and processing that with your belief system comes into play?
Absolutely, and I totally agree. It's in parroting back what the other person has said. You also have to analyze what is being said, and you have to make sure that that information is going to fly. And what I mean by that is, if it is something of a personal decision, is it against your faith principles? Is it against your core beliefs? The person could say, "Hey, I'm going to go down the street and, commit a felony," or something like that. Well, I could get that information from them, but I'm not going to act upon that information. I am going to, did I hear you correctly? And then I'm going to correct that. So very much that is listening to the internal voice, whether, you call that your higher power, or whether you call that your conscience, or whatever you call it. I mean,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've actually got a question here from our audience too. Christine said, in a world full of distractions, how can we become better listeners? Who wants to tackle that one? Chad, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because becoming a better listener is the same as being more effective in any other area of your life. We love to believe that we're multitaskers. We can do our work, we can think about what's tomorrow, plan out the menu for the next day, but really our mind can only focus on one thing. So decide what the most important thing is. And to me, the most important thing is the three people sitting in the room with me right now. In fact, in my mindset, nothing outside of that exists. Because when Russell's talking, Russell is the most important person in the world to me. Why? Because he's the only one interacting with me. And when I approach a conversation like that, you'll find that it eliminates the other distractions, because we prioritize what's important. When somebody is talking to you, they are the most important person in the room. If they're not, excuse yourself. Go deal with what's more pressing on your mind, so as not to disrespect that relationship, so you can come back together, learn and grow together in the future.
That's good advice.
Man, I'm totally guilty of doing the opposite of that advice too. We all are, sitting at a table with a bunch of people and you're like on your phone or something, or, totally in another place thinking about something else. And yeah, I do think that's phenomenal advice. Also, we do here on Millionaires Are Made, we do a challenge of the day. And one of our listeners here came up with a question and said, do you guys have any daily practices that help you stay curious and open-minded? And I think that's a perfect segue into our daily challenge. Kind of our guidelines for that are, it's got to cost $0. You got to be able to do it in 5 to 10 minutes every day. And something that you can sustain and keep for a week, right? So to this end, what do you guys think, or what are some examples of things that you do to stay curious and open-minded?
Spend 15 minutes listening to a podcast you don't agree with. The reason I say that is because it causes you to question. And in a world where we already think we know everything, and if you don't believe that, come on, be honest with us. We already know absolutely everything we know, and we know it well. But if we don't put ourselves in position to ask a new question, then we'll never seek a new answer. And that's what curiosity really comes from. That's where the open-mindedness is being willing to have a conversation with somebody to see a different perspective so that we can change the perspective that we come from. Because a new perspective in any area of your life will completely change the perspective of your entire life. So I think probably that would be my biggest, would be find somebody you don't agree with and either listen to the podcast or have a conversation with them to understand them, not to impress your point.
It's good advice.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal.
Good advice.
It is good advice.
Yeah, well, look, I want to thank all of you guys for joining us on the show here today. You know, I think that's a phenomenal daily challenge to listen to somebody who you don't necessarily agree with and really just take it in. I also want to thank all our sponsors that help make this show possible. You know, we really appreciate you guys and supporting Millionaires Are Made. Thank you, Russell, Stacie, and Chad for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great. It's fun.
Thank you to our